Good to be back with everyone. And if you've been keeping up with the Bible reading, you have completed 3 weeks. That's a good job. And what's fascinating to me is how many people, I'm read ahead, I've read ahead. And I'll just tell you, pace yourself. We've still got 49 more weeks, and if you get too far ahead when I preach, you won't remember what I'm talking about. So I'm very pleased with what you're doing. It's very encouraging to us all to take that on as a congregation this year to do that. And the difficult part out of our reading is actually picking something that may be a little out of the ordinary, a little bit more detailed than just the reading. And so tonight we're going to talk about the 10 plagues. And covers Exodus 7 through 12, and they're familiar to us. Even our children, when we come to those, you see them bailing out of the classrooms, and they've got these crafts that are dealing with those plagues, and they're learning about those. And I thought to myself, did I really ever ask why God did it? What was the purpose behind him sending 10 plagues? And I think that most of us, when we think about it, the first thing comes to mind, to display God's power. And I think that that's true, but we have a very specific and intentional God. And a lot of times on the surface, there may be something that's true about what we think about his actions or his nature, but then there's another level to it that really just blows us away. And that's the way I feel about the 10 plagues. That God had a specific aim beyond just demonstrating his power. You think about the Egyptians, they were polytheistic. They worshiped many gods. And they had enslaved God's people for 400 years. And so we look at it, then that's why God was punishing the Egyptians. And yes, that's true. But there's another layer that I want us to talk about tonight. In Exodus 3, 19 and 20, this is what God says to Moses. He says, "But I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go, not even by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in its midst. And after that, he will let you go." Well, Moses would probably think, well, why is he sure that the king of Egypt won't let us go? We're going to discuss that tonight. I think that there's a very real reason when it talks about God hardening Pharaoh's heart. That's not him operating and not giving him a choice in life. I think it's because of the way the Pharaoh already thought about himself, plus the things that God was doing to the land of Egypt that he was trying to process. And he didn't make the right decisions. Egypt was polytheistic in their society. Records show about this time of the Exodus, I don't include all of Egypt, I don't want to muddy the waters. At this particular time, there were about 80 or more known gods that the Egyptians worshipped. Everything that they did. Will Durant, in his book, The Story of Civilization, Volume 1, Our Oriental Heritage, he writes this about ancient Egypt. "For beneath and above everything in Egypt was religion. We find it there in every stage and form. We see its influence in literature, in government, in art, in everything except morality. Only in Rome and India shall we find plentiful a pantheon," talking about their panel of gods. So we cannot understand the Egyptian or the man unless we understand his gods. So prolific, it was all of their life. Was their religion to these some 80 gods. Historical reliefs, the carvings into stone and things like that, showed that most of the offerings to these gods, even though they had priests in their little temples, most of the offerings were made by the Pharaoh. He was viewed as the chief priest for the people. I find that to be interesting. Think about Pharaoh and his denial of everything that's going on. He's responsible for this appeasing of all of the gods of the people. And he thinks he's a god himself. So in Egypt, the Pharaoh was considered a god, Amun-Ra. He was the chief priest of the people, and they believed that the Pharaoh was a divine lineage, that all of those born into that in these Egyptian dynasties were divine lineage. So his power that the people of Egypt perceived that he had was immense. They bestowed upon him great reverence because he thought that he was helping the Egyptian people with these offerings that he's making to these multitude of gods. In Exodus 5:2, we should not be surprised that this was the initial response that the Pharaoh gave Moses when Moses goes in and stands before him and he says, "Let my people go." This was Pharaoh's response. And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." So he, at this point, is not afraid of any face-off. They had lived in Egypt and been productive for as long as he had been in power. This thought among Pharaoh and the Egyptians is what God is addressing when he told Moses this. "But Pharaoh will not heed you, so that I may lay my hand on Egypt and bring my armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." That word meaning the self-existent one, the eternal one. He said, that's who Pharaoh is going to know that I am. He said, when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them. Exodus 7:4-5. In Exodus 10:2, this statement is made. "And that you may tell in the hearing of your son and your son's son the mighty things I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord." And then the last time I want us to look at a piece that's similar to this is in Exodus 12:12. He says, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night," speaking of the 10th plague, "and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against," look at it, "all the gods of Egypt." He's pronouncing judgment even on them. And so I don't know if you've ever considered why these 10 plagues. Why did he do the thing that he did when he pronounced these plagues on Egypt? Well, he tells us in Exodus 12:12. It's going to be against all the gods of Egypt that he will execute this judgment, because he says, "I am the Lord. There aren't other gods." All of their wealth and prosperity and fertility, that's not because of this pantheon of 80 some odd gods. It's because of me. So each plague was aimed at showing God's power over their false gods. Specifically, it's like each one of those plagues, he's calling out this handful of gods that oversee this in the Egyptian's life. And God is showing control. If you have a God worth anything, he'll protect you and defeat your enemies and protect you from threats. That's the thought that God is going to bring into view for these Egyptians. You've worshiped them all this time and you give them all this credit for all you have. I'm going to show you that they are directly opposed to me and they don't control any of it. And so the first plague, they turned the water to blood. The Nile is the heartbeat of Egypt. It's their trade. It's their travel. It's what comes in on the annual floods to water the crops. All of life is finely tuned to its floods and its flow. And there isn't anything that doesn't connect back to the Nile in Egyptian life. And they had a god named Khnum, Khnum, and he was the guardian of the Nile. And in depictions of him, he had a human body with a ram's head. And they had Hapi, Hapi. He was the god of the annual flood of fishes and birds and marsh. That was his territory. And he was looked at as very powerful because everything in their existence depended on the Nile. And so if good things are happening, and this is the God of the annual flood that provides for us, then we worship him. He was depicted as blue or a green man and sometimes thought to manifest in a crocodile. And so can you imagine what happens when the water, and it's not just the Nile that was turned to blood. It was all water in Egypt. If there was a pond, if there was a hole in the ground, whatever it was, turned to blood. And if he manifests himself in a crocodile, so they believe, and the water turns to blood, what happened to the crocodiles? They either died or they fled the Nile. They fled their area. And so here they would see this manifestation of Hapi leaving them. Osiris was the god of the underworld, and they believed that the Nile was his bloodstream. And then Taret, the hippo goddess of the river. So they don't just have one that they're protecting. God is aiming at all of those. And don't you know the Egyptian is sitting in their hut listening or smelling the stink of the river, thinking to themselves, where is Canaan? Where is Hapi? Where is Osiris? Where is Taret? Where is Nu, who was the god of life in the Nile, depicted with blue or green skin, frog-headed man? Where are our gods? We don't have anything to drink. We don't even know how to water our crops with bloody water. The first plague is a heavy hitter. Most of their gods, besides these, are associated either directly or indirectly with the Nile River. And God is hitting a lot of them to no avail. In Exodus 7:17 through 19, thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the waters which are in the river with the rod that is in my hand, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that are in the river shall die, the river shall stink, and the Egyptians will loathe to drink the water of the river. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their streams, over their rivers, over their ponds, and over all their pools of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in buckets of wood and pitchers of stone. It didn't matter where it was. The Egyptians had never seen anything like this. This is the opposite. And maybe they were going to go run and Pharaoh was going to make offerings to all of these gods because somehow he's upset them. But I don't think that's the case. You read the way that Pharaoh answers Moses and Aaron. He is acknowledging that someone else beyond his control or offering has authored these plagues. Let's talk about the second plague. In Exodus 8:2 through 4. He's looking to, well, here, let's open it up. Exodus 8:2 through 4. But if you refuse to let them go, this is the second plague, if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all your territory with frogs. So the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your house, into your bedroom, on your bed, into the houses of your servants, on your people, into your ovens, and into your kneading bowls. And the frogs shall come up on you and on your people and all your servants. That's nasty. Can you imagine trying to prepare dinner and you're having to get all these frogs out of all those utensils? And you might find it strange, out of the few things that he mentioned, he said in your bedroom and on your bed. I told you that our God was intentional and specific. And there's a goddess, Heqt, Heqt, that is the goddess of birth, and she is the wife of their creator, their creation account, and she has the head and body of a frog. Yeah, we're going after her. Women would wear amulets of this goddess, this frog body, frog head, during childbirth for protection. Killing a frog, even accidentally, was punishable by death in Egypt. God put them in their bedrooms and on their beds with this idea of fertility on this goddess. Surely she would do something about that. And Pharaoh recognizes God as the power behind this plague. When Moses asked Pharaoh, when do you want me to intercede for you? And this is a whole nother lesson. But he says, tomorrow. Make the frogs go away tomorrow. I don't know why he said that, but they spent the night with all of these frogs. But in the fact that Pharaoh answered Moses and gave him that answer, what he's saying is, I acknowledge that your God has something to do with this. Or else he would have go, no, we'll be all right. I'll go make an offering to Heck and we'll be all right in the morning. In Exodus 8:13 and 14, so the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out in the houses, out of the courtyards and out of the fields. They gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. Can you imagine an Egyptian that worships this frog-bodied lady over childbirth, and she's the wife of the Creator, and all of the Egyptians are heaping out mounds of dead frogs all in their land? What must they have thought? Where is Het? Why did she let this happen? And then there's the third plague. You know, it's kind of a side note to mention that the magicians were able to duplicate this, but it's on a much smaller scale. You get that, right? So whatever they could do, they're like, oh, maybe they did it like this, and maybe it's a bucket of water they're able to change from water to blood, or maybe it's a few frogs that jump out of a place that looks invisible. But it wasn't wide scale. And then we get to the third plague, that of lice. Some scholars were talking about sometimes translated sandflies or fleas. But in Exodus 8, 16 and 17, so the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the land so that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and struck the dust of the earth, and it became lice on man and beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. You ever sat down and counted the particles of a handful of dust? If we're saying that the dust was turned into lice, you're not getting away from this one. You think they had Geb, who was god of the earth. The dust would have been his territory, would it not? And the Egyptian priests went to great lengths to avoid lice. I was reading somewhere they said that they would shave their bodies head to toe every other day just to avoid contracting lice in their everyday life. That they would take 2 baths in the morning and that they would take 2 baths in the evening. These are the priests that are around all this just to avoid lice. They're not avoiding these. The entire religious machine would grind to a halt with the interference of this lice. Just things I've never even thought about before. And I think that most of us, we've been through these 3 plagues, we give up, give them what they want, get them out of here. But they have been steeped in this false religion for generations and generations and generations. And if you have a man leading you that believes that he is a God himself, I believe God would harden his heart. Not in some direct operation type way, but by the circumstance. So we have the 4th plague. And a lot of times we say swarms. I think that's what a lot of the editions of our Bible have. But the translators say it's more directly related to flies or maybe even beetles. A beetle was a very sacred thing in Egypt. The scarab beetle was sacred and deified in Egyptian culture. Some even believe that's the way the sun came across the sky, was this dung beetle rolling the sun across. Others think that it was traveling in a boat, but the beetle was behind some of this. Amun-Ra, the creator and king, is depicted with having the head of a beetle. He was visible to the Egyptians as the disk of the sun. So when they look up and see the disk of the sun, that's Amun-Ra. They saw him as a beetle, like I said, rolling the sun across the sky. And then you would have Khepri, K-E-P-H-R-I, the insect god. And you would have Amun, A-M-U-N, the god of wind. Why couldn't he just blow these beetles away? Carry them away with the wind? None of these gods. Exodus 8, 21 and 22, he said, or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms on flies on you and your servants and your people and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. This plague, God said that he would show the difference between my people and your people. We're into this 4th plague, but God makes that specific statement. And it says that these swarms did not affect the Hebrews in Goshen. They weren't affected at all by that. And yet Pharaoh won't let them go. Every time it just seems like there may be this attitude of changing because of what's befallen them. But as soon as it goes away, he goes back to his intent. He's not going to let them go. They're going to serve him. And so we have the fifth plague. The livestock is diseased. Horses and cattle were valuable and sacred to the Egyptians. It's how they did anything. Transportation, labor, food. It all came from their livestock. And bulls were sacrificed to their god. Apis was one of their gods. He was a man that had a man's body and the head of a bull. And they would select a bull, an actual bull, and they would put a gold disc between its horns. And they would say that this is the manifestation of the god Apis. They believed that he had the power of prophecy. And so they would say if he moves this way or lays down over here or goes that way, that all of those movements are prophetic in some way for them. And when this bull died, they would search far and wide for a replacement. And they had a very specific coat and pattern of the way this cow was supposed to look or this bull was supposed to look. And then they would take the disc and put it between his horns. And when this bull died, they would mourn him as if the Pharaoh had died. A very deep and emotional process for them. They would even embalm this bull and entomb this bull and set up a shrine for him. So where was Apis? Because all of the livestock were going to be diseased. That would have included that bull. Hathor was the goddess of cattle. She was a woman with a cow's head, and she was the symbolic mother of the Pharaoh. All of her offspring out in the fields are going to be diseased. In Exodus 9:3, behold, the hand of the Lord will be upon your cattle in the field, on the horses, on the donkeys, on the camels, on the oxen, and on the sheep. A very severe pestilence. And it says all the livestock died, but not one of Israel's died. Can you imagine that? As much cattle as they had, surely there's supposed to be one that dies every couple of days. It just happens by the course of nature. I believe that too is a miracle in and of itself. Not one of Israel's died during the process of this. And let me say this. Sometimes I think that we think that these plagues were back to back to back to back, where it maybe happened in a couple of weeks. I would submit to you that it's probably over the course of a year or more that these are going on, because of some of the things that it's talking about. It's in different times of the year that those specific things are happening. So it wasn't just one right after the other. And maybe that helps us get in our mind that Pharaoh somehow intellectually gets back on his feet and has the confidence that he does to say, I'm not going to let them go every time. We have the sixth plague, the boils. In Exodus 9:8 and 9, so the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take for yourselves handfuls of ashes from a furnace, and let Moses scatter it toward the heavens in the sight of Pharaoh. And it will become fine dust in all of the land of Egypt, and it will cause boils that break out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. Deuteronomy 28:35 kind of speaks of a similar experience to us. I wouldn't imagine that it's anything that's pleasant. The Lord said, the Lord will strike you in the knees and on the legs with severe boils which cannot be healed, and from the sole of your feet to the top of your head. And I thought, well, maybe that's why specifically it says that the magicians could not stand before Moses and Aaron, because they were stricken with the boil so bad. The gods, Sekhmet, goddess of war and plague and medicine. And they said that this goddess could both cause plagues like this and also cause healing from them. But where was she? Amenhotep is the god of medicine. And this is interesting because Amenhotep was actually a real person and made some real advancements in medicine, in the body. And so what did they do? They deified him. And they began to worship him as if he had some kind of power beyond the grave. Thoth is a god of intelligence and medical learning. Isis, one of the most famous among their gods, was a significant healer, life giver, and protector. And so the Egyptians had to have looked around and said, where are our gods? There was no relief. We don't see anything where the Lord spared or made exception or made it easy when these plagues were done. Yet they wouldn't turn. And we have the seventh plague, the plague of hail. This livestock that it mentions, you may say, well, I thought all the livestock already died. Well, this livestock was not the livestock in the fields, which is what the other ones were. They were killed by the disease. In Exodus 9:25, and the hail struck throughout the whole land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast. And the hail struck every herb of the field and broke every tree of the field. And then Pharaoh shows a side that we haven't seen yet. And I think when we read it, we think, man, okay, he's seeing it. Here's where it's going to happen. He's going to let them go. And Pharaoh says this. He says, I have sinned this time. No, you've sinned every time. But it's nice that he's got some recognition here. He said, I've sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, and my people and I are wicked. Entreat the Lord that there may be no more mighty thundering and hail, for it is enough. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer. But it doesn't last. It only lasts until the hail stops. And I think sometimes is our religion like that? To where when things are going good, praise the Lord. I'm blessed and highly favored of the Lord. We say it all the time when things are going good. But the moment something goes bad, how are we? How come we can't give thanks to God in times of travel and trial? How come whatever it is only lasts for a little while and then we get back to our self-made thoughts that we've done those things? But in this hail, there's a goddess of the sky, Nut, N-U-T. And there's Horus, the god of the sky and protection, and he's depicted as a falcon-headed man. And you have Osiris, who was the god of vegetation. You have Seth, that was the god of crops. You have Nepri, the god of grain, and none of them came to the rescue of the Egyptians. And we have the eighth plague, the plague of locusts. And it says that the barley and the flax were struck, but there are other crops that have a later season that were not annihilated. And this is the part that I was telling you about, how it lasted over a period of time and not just like within a couple of weeks, is because the barley and flax, when they're in head or ready to be harvested, is usually about January. And so some of the other things that we were talking about were in the spring and in the summer, and when the inundation of the flood actually happens and all of those. But again, we could appeal to Osiris, right? He was the god of vegetation and harvest. And in their pantheon, Osiris is one of the strongest of the bunch. And he got attacked twice with the hail and the locusts to no avail. Bastet was the protector against vermin and rodents, and locusts would be included in this. They should have not been a problem for her, the cat-headed goddess. What about Senehem? God with a locust head, specific and central to this issue here. They should have gone and appealed to him. And you have Shu, the wind god, who's separated from the sky. Nut did that, and the earth, Geb, we mentioned him earlier. Where was Shu? God blew those locusts in, didn't he? And then when Pharaoh had had enough and beseeched the Lord for those to go away, it says that the Lord blew them into the Red Sea. Why couldn't have Shu, the wind god, have done that? Exodus 10:12 through 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt, and eat every herb of the land, all that the hail has left. So Moses stretched out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts, and the locusts went up over all the land of Egypt and rested on all the territory of Egypt. They were very severe. Previously there had been no such locusts as they, nor shall there be such after them. So even if they were going to think, oh, we've seen locusts before, not like this. Not like this. And you saw Moses and Aaron as Aaron stretched out his hand to make them come and make them go. To further demonstrate God's total control, at Moses' command, God blows the locusts into the Red Sea, and it says not one locust in Egypt remained. Like all the plagues, God is demonstrating both the coming and the going when spoken or mentioned. Total control, not the happenstance that the Egyptians had been living off of. The ninth plague of darkness. God will bring reproach and insult and domination to Egypt's gods. Their religion and their culture all centers around the god of the sun, Amun-Ra. He is the God of all the gods, the God of the sun. Ptah, P-T-A-H, created the sun, moon, and earth according to the Egyptians. Surely his control could not be thwarted. He created it. What about Tim, the god of the sunset, and any of the deities of the moon or the stars? Anything that would have to do with natural light. Where are they? Exodus 10, 22 and 23. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Can you imagine having darkness like that? And he said, I'll let your families, including your little ones, go and worship, but you leave all your livestock. He wants them to return. Moses is like, you don't get it. You don't get it. Our God does not negotiate with evil. Ask us modern day, should we? Should you and I as Christians, as God's children, negotiate with evil? It seems like we do that sometimes, don't we? We put those in the categories of not being that bad, or sins that we've read about in the Bible and that we've stood for, and maybe our friends or our family are involved in those, and then all of a sudden we're not as strong on our stance. God is showing us he does not negotiate with evil. No, we're not going with just the men and leave our women and children behind so we come back. No, we're not going with them and leaving our livestock behind. Let my people go in everything they own, because God does not negotiate with evil. He said not a hoof will be left behind. And that's the kind of resolve that we need to have when we are, quote, negotiating with evil. And we have the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. Exodus 11, 4 through 6. Then Moses said, Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the animals. Then there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as not was like it before, nor shall be like it again. Meshkanet, the goddess that presided over the birth of children. Men, the god of procreation. Selket, the guardian of life. Rinyatet, a cobra-like goddess that protected Pharaoh himself and was the symbol of motherhood. When I taught 5th and 6th grade Bible class, we would come to the plagues, and I would always ask the class, who is the firstborn in their family? And a few of the kids would raise their hands. You're dead. How many of you have a brother or a sister that is the firstborn? And a few more would raise their hand. They're dead. How many of your fathers are the firstborn in your family? They're dead. How many of your mothers? They're dead. Is there anybody left in the room that wasn't affected by the death of the firstborn? I haven't had a case yet. And not only that, all of the firstborn, he said, of the livestock. So here's the reason why the death of the firstborn really hits home. If Pharaoh has a firstborn, and he does, the people see him as a god. Remember, it's divine lineage. So the Israelites' God will kill their God in their presence. It says there's great mourning throughout their land, and there will never be any like it. Well, I can imagine that. Everyone in Egypt would have been affected by it. And here's the conclusion of it. It comes from Moses' father-in-law in Exodus 18:11. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. For in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he, God, was above them. That's what God wanted them to know. And the situation didn't have to end like it did, of Pharaoh's army being overthrown in the Red Sea. But God has a purpose, and he demonstrates that specifically and intentionally. You know what? He's the same God that we serve today. I hope you realize that. The thousands of years makes no difference. God's will on earth will always come to fruition. But he needs us to be able to do it. He needs Christians that say, I will read your word. I will appreciate who you are and the power and love that you have for us, and I will obey your commands. That's what he's asking for us. But we can't play around and be in self-denial about who we are in relation to him. And sometimes we fool ourselves with that. We carry around some of these sins that we don't think anybody knows about, and that may be true. But God does. God knew Pharaoh's heart the whole time. God put things before him that he had to make decisions, and he could have made decisions to be godly. You and I can make decisions to be godly. And we can also make decisions to be ungodly. But the thing about our God, even though there was a lot of vengeance here and a lot of destruction, he's full of love and mercy. And when one of his children decides that they're going to temporarily step out of his light, they're going to temporarily step away from the blood of his son, he allows them to come back. While we're still taking breaths on earth, he allows that door to be open for us to return to him. And the only thing that separates us from the love of God is when we choose to sin. But he is merciful, he is loving, and allows us to be forgiven of those. So if there's anybody here that has the opportunity to take advantage of the invitation to come back to God, to rededicate their life, to admit their sins and get rid of those, we give the opportunity now as we stand and sing.